Through the early years of the Cold War, the Truman administration's policy of containment had halted Soviet expansion in Europe. Their attempts to halt the spread of communism elsewhere were much less successful. The end of World War II brought renewed violence in a long-running Chinese Civil War. In 1949, Communist leader Mao Zedong launched an all-out offensive to defeat Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government. American efforts to mediate an end to the conflict failed, and Chiang's government was forced to flee into exile. At home, conservatives blamed President Truman's administration for what they called the loss of China to communism. News that the Soviets had successfully tested their first atomic bomb and a series of sensational spy cases convinced many that the enemy had seized the initiative in the Cold War. In June 1950, these fears seemed to be confirmed when the Communist Army of North Korea launched a blistering attack against its neighbor, South Korea. Within days, they had overrun the capital of Seoul and forced the defending South Korean army into full retreat. The North Korean invasion was the first military challenge of the Cold War. How the United States responded to the threat was critically important. Following World War II, Korea was temporarily divided at the 38th parallel and jointly occupied by the United States in the south and the Soviet Union in the north. The Soviets turned North Korea into a communist state. They installed into power a dictator named Kim Il-sung. In South Korea, the United States established a pro-Western government under Syngman Rhee, an oppressive yet fanatically anti-communist leader. Both Rhee and Kim aspired to unite Korea under their own rule, but neither the U.S. nor the Soviet Union would allow their client states to start a war. That changed in 1950. Kim finally convinced Joseph Stalin to support his invasion of South Korea. Kim would provide the troops, Stalin would supply the military hardware, and Mao Zedong, if it became necessary, would provide Chinese reinforcements. Kim promised that victory would be swift and decisive. But it would be neither. Half a world away, the North Korean invasion sparked intense debate in Washington. Was the assault ordered by the Soviets? Was this the beginning of World War III? President Truman and his advisors quickly decided to take action.
An act of aggression such as this creates a very real danger to the security of all free nations. This challenge has been presented squarely. We must meet it squarely.
The U.S. acted through the United Nations. Their mandate was explicit: repel the attack and restore peace to the area. A coalition of 15 countries agreed to send troops. But the overwhelming majority of fighting men were American, fighting under General Douglas MacArthur to defend American interests in the region. In diplomatic language, it was termed a police action, but it was a war. In the words of military historian Slam Marshall, the century's nastiest little war. General MacArthur rushed his troops to the battlefront. But the ill-prepared units were completely overwhelmed by the disciplined North Korean army, fighting with Soviet tanks and artillery. Within a month, MacArthur's army had retreated to the tip of the Korean peninsula, near Busan, while plans were laid for a daring amphibious landing behind enemy lines at the port of Incheon. If it were successful, the North Korean army could be trapped. If it failed, UN forces might be wiped out entirely. The assault at Incheon came on September 15, 1950. It was a gauntlet. Dangerous currents, extraordinary tides, defense fortifications, and massive seawalls. One planner described the obstacles. We drew up a list of every natural and geographic handicap, and Enchan had all of them. Despite the challenges, the invasion was a stunning success. Within days, the capital city of Seoul was liberated. With the restoration of South Korea, the UN mission had been accomplished. But General MacArthur demanded the authority to cross the 38th parallel into North Korea. The political risks were immense. Would the Soviets retaliate? Would Communist China intervene? There were rumors that Mao's troops were already massing along the Yalu River, the border between North Korea and China. President Truman reluctantly agreed to MacArthur's appeal, but he warned his general to stay away from the Chinese border. Mr. President, MacArthur replied, if the Chinese cross the Yalu, I will make of them the greatest slaughter in the history of warfare. In early October 1950, the first American troops marched north, across the 38th parallel, toward China. By the end of October, MacArthur's forces had captured the North Korean capital of Pyongyang. By Thanksgiving Day, they approached the Yalu River. As the general prepared for the final offensive, he cabled President Truman. This should, for all practical purposes, end the war. But MacArthur had underestimated the enemy. On the night of November 25th, the Chinese army struck with fury.
At the White House in Washington, top defense officials of the nation gathered to discuss the gravest world crisis since Poland and Pearl Harbor. President Truman voices his accusation of red imperialism.
The forces of the United Nations are in Korea to put down an aggression that threatens not only the whole fabric of the United Nations, but all human hopes of peace and justice. If the United Nations yields to the forces of aggression, no nation will be safe or secure. If aggression is successful in Korea, we can expect it to spread throughout Asia and Europe and to this hemisphere. We are fighting in Korea for our own national security and survival. We have committed ourselves to the cause of a just and peaceful world order through the United Nations. We stand by that commitment.
UN forces fought desperately to escape the Chinese onslaught. At the Chosin Reservoir, 6,000 Marines were encircled by the enemy. With temperatures dipping to minus 40 degrees below zero, their situation seemed hopeless. But in a heroic effort, dubbed the Chosin Breakout, their big guns and air support smashed the Chinese lines. 60,000 enemy troops were killed, and the Marines escaped. General MacArthur demanded that he be allowed to wage an all-out war against China. But President Truman was determined that Korea should remain a limited war. When MacArthur made it clear that he disagreed with that policy, the president fired him. By the spring of 1951, the war had degenerated into a brutal stalemate near the 38th parallel. American troops continued to fight and die in Korea for 2 long years.